Welcome back now for the news in detail. The foreign ministers of Pakistan, China and Afghanistan are meeting in Islamabad for the third round of trilateral talks on the Afghan peace process. Meeting China's Wang Yi, Pakistan's foreign minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India's illegal actions in occupied Kashmir threaten regional security. Qureshi said human rights violations in the occupied valley are at an all-time high after India scrapped its special status on August 5th. During the delegation-level talks, Pakistan and China signed an MOU to enhance cooperation in the education sector. The foreign ministers also discussed economic cooperation and progress on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project. Now, for more details, we are joined by our Islamabad correspondent, Isa Naqvi. So, Isa, the three foreign ministers are here in Islamabad, and trilateral talks are taking place amid a decisive push for a peace deal between the United States and the Taliban. So, Isa, how significant is the timing?
It's very important that the three foreign ministers of China, Pakistan and Afghanistan, they are meeting in the Foreign Office of Pakistan today in Islamabad, and this is going to be the third round of the trilateral talks, the process that was initiated in 2017 and has had its first round take place in Beijing. The second round took place in 2018 in Kabul, and now at a juncture when we are talking about a possible post-peace deal in Afghanistan, that scenario, now this meeting is going to discuss not just the security and counter-terrorism cooperation, but also that how Pakistan and China can extend cooperation to Afghanistan to deal with the aftermath of a possible withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan. So all these issues are on table, along with regional connectivity, the economic cooperation, and how Afghanistan can benefit from the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project.
Right, Isa, apart from the peace deal between Afghanistan and the United States, what else do you expect to be discussed by the three foreign ministers?
Now, among the three foreign ministers, all these regional issues and regional cooperation between the three countries that will be discussed, but also importantly, the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Salahuddin Rabbani, after he arrived in Foreign Office a little while ago, he also held a bilateral meeting with the foreign minister of Pakistan, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, wherein Pakistan assured the Afghan foreign minister of its continued support for forging peace and supporting an intra-Afghan dialogue to deal with this crisis. So overall, we have had a bilateral meeting between the Chinese foreign minister and Pakistani foreign minister, and also the Afghan and Pakistani foreign ministers.
Right, Isa, earlier Pakistan and China's foreign ministers held bilateral consultations. So what issues were discussed in that meeting?
Primarily the one-on-one meeting, in the one-on-one meeting, the foreign minister of Pakistan explained it to the foreign minister of China that how Indian illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir has threatened the regional security. He also thanked and appreciated China's role in supporting Pakistan's stance in the United Nations Security Council, and also the whole wide-ranging bilateral relationship between Pakistan and China, the regional security issues, and the progress on the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor that was discussed. And also, importantly, a new memorandum of understanding has been reached between Pakistan and China, wherein China is going to extend support to Pakistan in establishing smart schools and e-learning.
Right, Isa Naqvi, thank you very much. Correspondent from Islamabad updating us. Now, moving on, Switzerland's President Huawei will discuss the situation in occupied Kashmir with India's President Ramnath Kovind. They will be meeting in Bern on Friday. The Swiss Department of Foreign Affairs says the agenda for their summit also includes human rights. Last month, Switzerland renewed its warning to citizens, calling them to refrain from traveling to Indian-occupied Kashmir. Amid the mounting pressure on New Delhi, senior U.S. diplomat Alice Wells has said Washington supports direct dialogue between Pakistan and India on Kashmir. Pakistan has foiled another Indian attempt to prepare grounds for a false flag operation. Indian Army and media were falsely projecting two Pakistanis who inadvertently crossed the line of control last month as terrorists. Pakistan military revealed that 21-year-old Muhammad Nazim and 30-year-old Khalil Ahmed are the local farmers from the Azad Jammu and Kashmir. They had gone for grass cutting when they inadvertently crossed the line near Hajipur area. The military spokesperson said Indian media fabricated the facts and declared both innocent individuals as members of a proscribed organization. It said the issue was discussed with the Indian authorities during weekly hotline contact. Indian authorities acknowledged Pakistan's claim and promised to get back on the account after legal formalities. Now, Indian media rights organization says Narendra Modi's government is silencing journalists in occupied Kashmir as part of the lockdown it imposed on 5th of August. Their report, based on interviews with 70 media professionals in the occupied valley, says journalists are being subjected to harassment and arbitrary arrest. Media rights investigators observed intense surveillance and informal probes of journalists who published reports critical of the government. Meanwhile, Kashmiri activist Sheila Rashid has described sedition charges brought against her as frivolous and politically motivated. Delhi police booked Rashid yesterday for criticizing India's human rights violations in occupied Kashmir on social media. Meanwhile, Pakistan has refused to allow the Indian President airspace access for flight to Iceland. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said decision is taken in view of India's continuing oppression in occupied Kashmir. He said New Delhi's atrocities in Kashmir will be taken up to the United Nations Human Rights Council. The Foreign Minister said Kashmiris in occupied valley are living under siege since August 5th. Meanwhile, India has failed in its attempt to become the first nation to explore the moon's south pole. The Indian Space Research Organization says it lost contact with the Chandrayaan-2 spacecraft as it attempted a soft landing. It says communications with the lander was lost 2.1 kilometers from the moon's surface. ISRO Chief K. Sivan says data is being analyzed to find out what went wrong. Chandrayaan-2 took off on July 22nd to probe the unexplored lunar territory. The South Pole is believed to contain some water because its craters are suspected of being unexposed to high temperatures. Only the United States, Russia and China have successfully attempted moon landings. Moving on, Iran says it has reactivated 20 nuclear centrifuges in its latest rollback of commitments to the 2015 nuclear deal. The centrifuges can boost Iran's production of enriched uranium. The chief of the Atomic Energy Organization, Behrouz Kamalvandi, says a chain of 164 advanced centrifuges will become operational by November. He says Iran has lifted the limitations on nuclear research and development adopted under the 2015 agreement. Kamalvandi says the measures have been taken in retaliation to the U.S. withdrawal from the Pact. But he says Iran could reverse the decision if all parties fulfilled their commitments. Now, for more on this, we are joined by Tehran-based political analyst, Mr. Mohammad Marandi. Thank you for your time, Mr. Marandi. So, Iran has reactivated 20 nuclear centrifuges in its latest rollback of commitments under the 2015 nuclear deal. So, Mr. Mohammad, what kind of pressure Tehran can face after this move?
Well, since the Europeans are already in complete violation of the nuclear deal, and they are violating every single of their 11 commitments, there really isn't nothing for Iran to lose. The Americans, of course, are in full violation, and they're bullying other countries to violate the agreement as well. So what the Iranians are doing now is that they're waiting patiently for over a year and being the only side to comply by its commitments. Now the Iranians are saying we are going to gradually decrease our commitments in order to put pressure on the Europeans to be abiding by their obligations. And now that the Iranians have moved in that direction, we do see the Europeans taking this more seriously, but we still don't have any significant results at this stage. But obviously, the Europeans can't have their cake and eat it too. They can't sit there and say, we accept the nuclear deal, but not abide by it on the one hand, yet expect the Iranians to abide by their commitments on the other hand.
Right, Mr. Morandi, French Defense Minister Florence Parly has said Paris will continue efforts to bring Iran into full compliance with a 2015 nuclear deal. So would France be able to convince Tehran in halting its nuclear program?
Well, that's a rather ridiculous statement to make, because the French are in complete violation of the deal. The French cannot expect Iran to abide by a deal, whereas the French are not abiding by the deal. The Iranians waited for well over a year before they started decreasing their commitments. Iran is still abiding by most of its commitments, but the French and the Europeans are not abiding by any of their commitments. So unless the French shift policy, they grow backbone, they stand up to US pressure, unless the French and the Europeans do that and start abiding by their 11 commitments, then Iran will have no option but to continue decreasing its commitments to the nuclear deal. The ball is and has been in the European court and in the French court as well. The Iranians are the ones who have grievances, not the Europeans.
Right, Mr. Morandi, thank you very much for your time and your updates. More news to come up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Israeli forces have shot dead 2 Palestinians during weekly protests on the Gaza border. 80 other protesters were injured. Israeli soldiers shot the 2 teenage victims in the neck and stomach. The IDF has killed over 300 Palestinians and injured 18,000 others since the weekly protests began in March last year. The protests called for Israel to lift its blockade of Gaza and allow the return of Palestinian refugees to their ancestral homes. The largest prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine since the 2014 separatist is underway. Ukrainian officials say 35 detainees from each side are being returned home. Russian media says 2 buses carrying Ukrainian prisoners have arrived at Moscow's Vnukovo airport. Lawyers say the prisoners include filmmaker Oleg Sentsov and 24 Ukrainian Navy sailors detained off the Crimean coast last November. The Russian media also says a Ukrainian aircraft is waiting to fly them home. It says a Russian plane is on standby at Kiev airport to bring home Russian prisoners. Hurricane Durian has made landfall on the outer banks of North Carolina. Meanwhile, the hurricane's death toll has climbed to 43 in the northern Bahamas Abaco Island. Since leaving the Bahamas, the slow-moving storm has gained strength off the eastern U.S. seaboard. The National Hurricane Center said the storm made landfall at Cape Hatteras with maximum winds of 150 kilometers per hour. Durian is currently battering the Carolinas, where coastal towns have been flooded. The hurricane also whipped up tornadoes and cut hundreds of thousands of consumers' power supply. Hundreds of people remain trapped amid rising floodwaters. The leaders of 7 countries home to the vast Amazon have signed a pact to protect the world's largest tropical rainforest. The presidents of Bolivia, Ecuador and Peru attended the one-day summit hosted by Colombia's president in the city of Leticia. Find out why in this report.
Forest fires in the Amazon have surged this year, destroying vast swathes of a vital bulwark against global climate change. The highest number of forest fires since 2010 are tearing through the Amazon, which is home to 1 million people. Critics have blamed Brazilian President Bolsonaro's policy of opening up more of the forest to agriculture and mining for the damage. Colombian President Ivan Duque has called on the region's leaders to work together to combat deforestation.
Here we are signing the agreement, an agreement where we coordinate and work harmoniously for common goals, a pact which obliges us, commits us, and motivates us to protect our Amazon.
The presidents were joined by indigenous leaders whose communities are the hardest hit by the Amazon forest fires. Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno said it's time to take action without further delay.
Little remains for words. From this signature, we are going to fundamentally take actions because no theory is valid as long as it does not acquire earthiness and above all favors those who are most in need.
The 7 nations have agreed to put more time into education and to increase the role of the Amazon's indigenous communities.
Moving on, over 100 wildfires have been recorded in the Australian states of Queensland and New South Wales. The ferocious bushfires have destroyed at least 21 homes across 2 states on the country's east coast. Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, has endured over 65 bush and grass fires. Queensland State Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says she stands with grieving families.
Of trying to reach those families, we understand that they're all safe, but they will be going through a lot of grief at the moment, and I know that our community will pull together and definitely make sure that they get back on their feet.
The unprecedented hot spring weather has created drought-like conditions in various parts of Australia. Pope Francis has called a rapid deforestation a global threat. The Pope said plants and animals' biodiversity is endangered by contraband and illegal exports. Pope Francis appealed during a visit to Madagascar, which has lost 44% of its forests in 60 years. He said forests are menaced by fires, poaching, and the cutting down of woodland. Recent Amazon fires have lent urgency to the Pope's call to protect the environment. The Pope suggested effective measures to safeguard the environment for all generations. Now, in Belgium, the country's love for pigeon racing has brought fame to breeder and trainer Joel Verschoot. His starbird, Armando, has made headlines for being the fastest international racer. Armando is a highly sought-after bird following his recent win at the recent Racing Birds Championships League in Europe. You can meet Armando in this report.
Meet Armando. He is an expert at dodging power cables and airborne predators. He has a string of remarkable wins to his name. Armando is an elite racing pigeon. His DNA became highly sought after by international breeders and trainers following his recent win at the Champions League for Europe's best birds in Poland. The feathered flyer brought trainer and breeder Joel Verschoot €1.25 million from Chinese buyers through an online auction. Standing in his garden in Ingelmunster, Belgium, Verschoot still remembers his bird's incredible record-setting auction, which he credits to Armando's intelligence.
It's not bigger or stronger than any other pigeons, but Armando is very smart, and you can see it through its results in competitions.
Joel Verschoot could have settled down to a comfortable life after he sold the world's most expensive racing bird, but inheriting the tradition from his father, for the 64-year-old Joel, pigeon breeding is a hobby turned international business he plans to continue. Dedicating 10 hours a day to his 300 birds, Joel is now preparing his beloved Armando's heirs for future races.
Le bon santé, tu vas voir.
You can see the pigeon is healthy if the eyes are very light. If the beak is very white, a gray beak is not good. And wings must be flexible, very flexible. That's how a good pigeon is.
Gris nez, c'est pas bon.
Breeders in Belgium have many approaches to pigeon racing. Some incorporate new methods of breeding. The country has almost 20,000 licensed breeders, something that makes this industry a strong one.
In the business stories now, Japan has rejected South Korea's offer to extend a military intelligence sharing pact in exchange for the easing of Japanese trade controls. Officials in Tokyo said the government would not condone bolstering trade controls for security cooperation. The 2016 intelligence sharing accord is set to expire in November after South Korea withdrew last month. Seoul pulled out after Tokyo imposed controls on its exports of materials used to manufacture semiconductors and display panels. Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei has launched the world's first 5G chipset at a trade show in Berlin. The Kirin 990 is the smallest 5G mobile phone chip and has lower power consumption than its competitors. Vice President Ai Weiwei says Huawei has worked on the chip for the last 2 years. The Vice President says the chip integrates a number of new technological innovations, so the total number of transistors exceeds 10 billion. Huawei's flagship phone equipped with the Kirin 990 series will be released later this month. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, with the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.